Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. We're going to give everybody a few more minutes to get joined into our webinar, so please sit tight. We'll get started very shortly. Good morning, everyone. We're just giving people another minute to join up. We've got about 200 people on so far, and that number is still growing, so we're going to give everybody one more minute to join in.
Really quickly, this is Dooney. Can we let the president know the order of speaking quickly so that she knows?
Hi, Dooney, you're live. Hi, Dooney, this is Rebecca. I'll be introducing the president. She's going to be speaking, I think, third. So.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome and thank you for joining us this morning for our webinar focusing on the PPP forgiveness application and the Employee Retention Tax Credit. My name is James O'Neill. I'm the Director of Suburban Outreach for the Illinois Business Immigration Coalition. IBIC represents a growing and diverse coalition of businesses, business associations, and industry leaders advocating for common sense immigration reform, and during this pandemic, advocating for programs that serve the small business community equitably. Before we get started, I want to thank our co-hosts and partners, Cook County President Preckwinkle, Self-Help Federal Credit Union, the Illinois Restaurant Association, and the National Partnership for New Americans. Without these people and organizations, this would not have been possible, so thank you very much. Today's webinar is in English, but the same material will be covered next week in Spanish if that is your preferred language. Also, before we get started with our program, we would just like to say that we know that this has been a very hard time for everybody. Tomorrow is the first day of reopening for some businesses as Illinois moves into phase 3. We know many of you had or will have to make changes to your business operations, and Cook County, IBIC, NPNA, and IRA are working together to assist small businesses in Cook County. Please feel free to reach out to us if you would like guidance or assistance in relation to assistance available to your business. Next week, we will be hosting another webinar that specifically addresses reopening strategies and best practices for small businesses. And we will be joined by experts to talk about best practices. For now, on the screen are websites for the webinar's hosts on COVID response and a link for the state of Illinois that includes guidelines and toolkits for reopening separated by industry and by phase. We will share this website with you again at the end of the presentation, and we'd also like to note that you should check with your local municipal governments, check their websites for more specific information. But now I would like to introduce our fearless leader of IBIC, our Executive Director, Rebecca Shee, to get our program started.
Great. Thank you so much, James, and for your efforts putting this together. Good morning, everyone. I have some really good news just to start off the morning. Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin moments ago announced the $10 billion set aside for CDFIs for the second round of the Paycheck Protection Program. Thanks to your tremendous advocacy, the support and leadership of President Preckwinkle, businesses of color, sole proprietors, and the unbanked will have more access to critical relief to pay their workers and keep their doors open. We will also continue to push and work with our legislative champions for more improvements, including extension of the processing period to December 31st, the move from 8 weeks to 24 weeks for forgiveness, the inclusion of MDIs, and automatic forgiveness for some smaller loans. I'm happy to introduce a steadfast leader in the face of this crisis. President Preckwinkle is a fighter for the poor and working families in Cook County. Even this last week, we saw President Preckwinkle make equity-focused decisions to make sure that people of color are not unfairly targeted during COVID. We're so honored to partner with her to help small businesses of color and sole proprietors access the PPP, and will continue to do just that. Thanks to her partnership and leadership, ABIC and our partners have secured nearly $5 million for over 150 suburban cook businesses, sole proprietors, mom and pops, restaurants, and you're going to hear a really powerful story today from a restaurateur. Her leadership is critical in making sure that our most vulnerable are not left behind during COVID. I am so honored to introduce Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle.
Good morning. And Rebecca, thank you for that kind introduction. I want to thank and acknowledge all our partners for preparing this webinar today, and thank those who are making presentations. And welcome to all of our participants. I know that COVID has created unprecedented challenges for your businesses. During this time of physical distancing and virtual interaction, many of us feel more alone than ever, but know that you are not alone. We are not alone, and Cook County is here to help. We've published the Cook County COVID-19 Response Plan, From Rapid Response to Equitable Recovery. This plan affirms our commitments, our priorities, and our actions in response to COVID-19, both now and over the next 2 years. Since the launch of our national coalition with the Illinois Business Immigration Coalition, thank you, Rebecca, the Illinois Restaurant Association, and the National Partnership for New Americans, and economic development organizations, more than 7,800 people have responded to us requesting information and expressing the need for deeper services. Today's webinar is one of the ways we are helping our most vulnerable businesses. To date, our Technical Assistance Network was able to help more than 179 businesses access more than $3 million from the Paycheck Protection Program. And the numbers are growing every day. There's a critical need for people to connect to the resources we are providing, most urgently to assist small businesses, nonprofits, and independent contractors with getting access to the small business Paycheck Protection Program and other financial products. Today, I'm pleased to participate in and host the 6th in a series of webinars providing information to our small business community and nonprofits. We're acting quickly to make sure you are well informed about how to access financial resources and understand how to put them to use. As we witnessed, there's not enough funding, or those dollars were snatched up by large corporations with existing banking relationships. And the data shows that the most marginalized are scrambling for resources. That's why our efforts are essential. We intend to help as many suburban small businesses, nonprofits, and independent contractors as we can. We also realize that for many, navigating the maze of financial products on the market is complicated. That's why we launched the Cook County Technical Assistance Program in partnership with the national and state organizations that are on this webinar. We're partnering with many of Chicago's leading community development finance institutions, CDFIs, to provide wraparound services and get expert advice on identifying additional resources and products that will benefit our small business community. Our goal is to provide a comprehensive package of wraparound loan funding and business services. COVID-19 has devastated our small businesses, not-for-profits, gig workers, and independent contractors. We realize that this is no ordinary time, and small businesses and self-employed workers are the heart of our municipalities throughout Cook County. And I want you to know that we're doing all we can to support them during this difficult time. To learn more about the suite of services we're offering, please visit us at www.cookcountyil.gov, that's GOV/recovery. www.cookcountyil.gov, that's GOV/recovery. I'm confident that this initiative will help our small business communities struggling to make ends meet. So please use this time to listen, ask questions, and let us know how we can help you. We know that these are extraordinary times, and we want you to know that Cook County is with you every step of the way. Together, we will continue to work as one Cook County to help you get the resources you need to recover when this is finally over. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, President Preckwinkle, for the update, and thank you for working tirelessly to both find and create relief programs for the small business community in Cook County. Our next speaker is a partner at Sassetti LLC and has over 20 years of public accounting experience. He concentrates on servicing restaurants, distributors, construction, and other professionals in the service sector. He is joining us today to talk about the Employee Retention Tax Credit. Please welcome Mr. Dirk Albeck.
Thank you, James. Today I'm just going to talk about the high-level highlights of the Employee Retention Credit or Employee Retention Tax Credit. There's a lot to absorb, and in the 5 minutes I have, what I really want you to go away with is that this credit is out there, and it's available for many businesses and not-for-profit organizations, and to ask about it and take advantage of it. It's basically a refundable tax credit against certain employment taxes that you pay quarterly, and it's equal to 50% of the qualified wages up to $5,000 per employee, and they're for wages that are paid to employees between March 12, 2020 and January 1st of 2021. Who is eligible? The eligibility is for operations that are fully or partially suspended because of a government mandate limiting commerce, or if you experience a significant decline, usually around 50% in gross receipts. And again, those are calculations, and I want you to really walk away from this today in knowing that this credit is out there, and it's really a good credit to take advantage of. They define what are qualified wages. It really depends on the number of employees you have, whether you're over 100 employees or not. And there are some limitations on it, too, that if you're taking advantage of the Family First COVID Response Act or the Work Opportunity Tax Credit, you can't take both. That also applies to the PPP program, too, which is getting a lot of press as opposed to this. And if you did take money from the PPP, you cannot get the Employee Retention Credit. The way to claim the credit is really three ways. You do file quarterly 941 for your quarterly payroll tax returns. That's one way. You can reduce your federal tax deposits during the quarter, or you can ask for advance of the credit by filing a Form 7200. Other items to note, by the one, is that if you do take the credit, you can't take a deduction for the same expense, which is pretty typical in the tax system. Things coming up. There's, just like Rebecca said, there's talk about expanding the PPP as well as this tax credit too by making the value of the credit higher, removing some limitations on number of employees and demonstrating the need for the tax break, and also making this eligible for, even if you do take the PPP loan and have forgiveness, you'd also be eligible for that. So there's talk about that, and that would help expand this too. In conclusion, this credit's a valuable credit for employers. I did, as part of my presentation, there are almost 100 frequently asked questions pertaining to this credit that goes into good detail, and I did give a link to that in my presentation. And again, what's important is you're aware of this credit to take advantage of it if you're not currently working with the PPP program, because a credit like this is very valuable, and it's really, there's no reason not to take advantage of it if you've suffered some setbacks because of the COVID-19 crisis.
Thank you.
And that really concludes my presentation. Thanks, James.
That's very helpful. And just so everybody knows, Dirk will be around at the end of the program as part of our question and answer panel. So if you have questions about the Employee Retention Tax Credit, please feel free to type them into the question box on your viewing panel. Moving through our program, we'll now pivot to the Paycheck Protection Program. And to start that discussion, I think it's important to remind ourselves why the PPP is important. So I would like to introduce Mr. Safa Zarzour, principal owner of Zarzour Law and co-owner of Damascus Falafel, a restaurant in Willowbrook, to share his experience with the PPP application process.
Thank you, James. Good morning, everyone. My name is Safa Zarzour. As James have mentioned, I'm an attorney, principal owner of my own law firm that employs 4 individuals. And I'm also the descendant of a long line of restaurateurs where I grew up in Damascus, dating back to my great great grandfather. A history that I'm very proud of, and that have moved me to start a restaurant with a friend called Damascus Falafel in Willowbrook to share basically the cuisines of my hometown that I grew up with. This pandemic has brought a lot of challenges for my 2 businesses. For the law firm, I am a municipal and a nonprofit attorney. And as all of you know, courthouses shut down. And so, as the prosecutor of the towns of Bridgeview and Lyons, I no longer do prosecutions. My adjudications also cease to exist. Anything related to going to the courthouse is no longer there. And obviously, all the funds that are generated from that are gone. And so it was important for me to file for a PPP on behalf of the law firm. Also, Damascus Falafel, like any other restaurants, we were forced to close down the dining room area, and we had a very significant drop in revenue. In fact, the very first week after the closing of the dining area, we had about 20 to 25% revenues only of what we usually have. So I immediately applied for the PPP loan through the program. And during the first round of businesses, I applied through my bank, Chase, that I've banked with for many, many years before. And it was very frustrating. I did not hear back. And eventually the whole period finished, and you can imagine my panic. The whole period finished without me qualifying. I got a letter that basically says, sorry, you didn't get the loan at this time, but we think there will be a second round. So at that time, I approached IBIC, and I told them about what I'm facing, and they basically immediately directed me to apply through Seaway. And Seaway is a bank that's a division of Self-Help Federal Credit Union. I did apply. The process was extremely smooth. I had people literally holding my hand through the process, answering every question I had. At times, even late into the night, I would have a question, I would send an email, and I would get an answer to my surprise before the morning. So basically, eventually, I did get a PPP for my law firm through Seaway, and ironically, Chase, who I submitted an application to, but didn't get anything, and without renewing my application or doing anything, they came through with the second one without without responding to me or anything else. So although I received both loans, and I received one of them from Chase, I can tell you that without the help that I received from Seaway and CDFIs, I would have been in a lot of trouble, and at least in a lot of heartache and agony until I got the relief. So I thank the PPP program. I am very grateful for the attention I received from IBIC and from Seaway, and I am extremely happy, and my employees are happy, all 20 of them, about 14 or 15 at the restaurant and 4 at the law firm. I'm very grateful because this loan is going to keep us going, our families, and keep the restaurant afloat until hopefully we all pass through this period. As a Syrian immigrant and someone who is very active in the Arab and Muslim community in the Chicagoland, this relief has been not only a lifeline for me, my employees, and my clients, but it has also helped protect our heritage by preserving those spaces like Damascus Falafel, where our community thrives and where we can build and share our culture with our neighbors as well. I do hope that as we are hearing the PPP loan forgiveness period is extended, that is extremely important, because really that is my next worry, is us ending up owing some money at a time where we can ill afford paying back anything. And so I hope that it is extended, that it will enable us to bring all of our employees back and help us develop a strategy for the business as we begin reopening. For now, Damascus Falafel is still accepting orders for pickup and delivery, and we would love to share our first-class cuisine with any of you who may be able to come out there into Willowbrook. If your business qualifies, I urge you that you apply for the PPP loan. And if your big bank is not listening to you, I know that IBIC and Seaway through the program that has been put together in partnership between IBIC, Cook County, and the various partners will be able to help you. And I'm thankful for everyone putting this webcast today and giving me the opportunity to share my story. And thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zarzur, and congrats on receiving a loan. We will definitely keep advocating for an extension of the loan period. Our next presenter is a close personal friend of mine. He doesn't like to brag, so I'll do it for him a little bit. Idekere Picon is the first DACA recipient in Illinois to become a licensed attorney, and he has been a staunch advocate for his community ever since. Currently, he works as the Director of Legal Services for IBIC, and he is joining us today to remind us that the PPP still has money left and that we are helping small businesses apply for relief.
Thank you, James, and thank you for your kind introduction. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Very quickly, I want to run through a brief overview of the Paycheck Protection Program in case there's any audience members that are joining us for the first time and have yet to apply for PPP and have been considering whether or not they qualify. So very quickly, initially the PPP program was funded at $350 billion. There was a second round of funding of $320 billion. And at the moment, as Rebecca mentioned at the top of the webcast, there's still around $100 billion left in that fund for businesses to apply for PPP. Moving on to the next slide, slide 18. The Paycheck Protection Program does provide forgivable loans to individuals, businesses, to sole proprietors, independent contractors, nonprofits, and small businesses of less than 500 employees. And they are administered through the SBA. As Rebecca mentioned, the initial coverage period was to end on June 30th, 2020, but that there's been advocacy to extend that period through the end of the year just to give businesses a little more flexibility in the use of those funds. Moving on to the next slide, slide 19. So if you are a business, a nonprofit who employs less than 500 people, or you are an independent contractor or sole proprietor, then you qualify for PPP, including businesses who have, specifically restaurants and any sort of food industry businesses who have more than one location. As long as each location is under 500 employees, that business will also qualify for PPP by itself. Moving on to the next slide. So what's key is that the applicant, the borrower, must have been in operation on February 15, 2020 and paid salary and payroll taxes for their payroll before or on 2/15/2020. No other guarantee or collateral is required for the loan. So it's a pretty straightforward in terms of what requirements you need to submit to apply for a PPP. Moving on to the next slide. In terms of calculating the loan amount for employers and nonprofits that are non-seasonal, meaning all year round, what you want to do is you want to aggregate all of your payroll expenses on a monthly basis for 2019. Once you aggregate the last 12 months for 2019, then you divide it by 12. That gets you your average monthly payroll. You multiply that average payroll by 2.5, and that gets you your maximum loan amount under the Paycheck Protection Program. The loan, however, cannot exceed $10 million per borrower or per eligible entity. The calculation for seasonal employers is a little different, but it's only because it looks at a different time frame than a business that operates all year round. But you would still aggregate the monthly payroll average and multiply it by 2.5. So if there's any questions about eligibility for PPP, please reach out to us. Let us know if you have any questions. As you heard from the previous speaker, we've been helping businesses with the technical assistance on PPP, and it's something that we can continue doing since we still have funds available through the Paycheck Protection Program. Thank you.
Thank you, Irakere. It is definitely not too late to apply for this program, and we are here to help you through it. Our next speaker is a true wealth of information. She has appeared on webinars with us before, and we are incredibly lucky to have her back this morning. Please welcome the Director of the SBA 504 Loan Program at Self-Help, Tracy Ward.
Thank you. I hope I live up to that really nice introduction. So a little bit about Self-Help, just to give some background. We're a community development financial institution, and we've been lending with SBA programs for about 30 years. So we have a lot of experience with SBA, which has helped a lot as we've tried to dive into the Paycheck Protection Program rules. So far, we've done over 1,200 loans to borrowers for the Paycheck Protection Program, totaling around $160 million. And our focus has really been on nonprofits and on organizations led by people of color. So that's really where we've tried to make sure we can have an impact with this program and help organizations like yours continue to keep your staff and continue to operate. So I want to talk about the forgiveness guidance that has come out so far from SBA, really just an overview at this point. It's important to remember that there is still additional guidance being released on forgiveness for PPP loans. So some of this is still changing, and we hope and think that some of this will improve and change in ways that allow you more flexibility to use your funds and be forgiven for the loan. But I want to at least talk through today what the current rules are, so you can start to think about planning for how to use the rest of your PPP funds, and also planning for the types of documentation you need to be keeping and pulling together for forgiveness. But I say all that as we go through this. I think it's important to remember it's really too early to apply right now. Even if you've already spent your funds, you should really wait until there's more information on forgiveness, because we're hopeful it would improve your chances of being 100% forgiven. So your lender, if it's Self-Help, we will reach out once the time is right and once the rules are settled, and give clear instructions on what you need to do to apply, what you need to pull together, and whatever lender you're working with should be doing that for you at that time. So I'll go ahead and jump to slide 25. This is really just a snapshot of the first page of the forgiveness application. So the forgiveness application that SBA released a little over a week ago is 11 pages. It's very small print, lots of calculations built into it. It's a really complicated document, and we hope that it does get streamlined into a less complicated version. But right now, this is the application that you would need to complete. A lot of those 11 pages are instructions, so there are really only about 4 pages of that document that you will complete and turn back in. So I'll focus on those for this. So slide 25 is that first page of the forgiveness calculation that you would turn back in. And this page is really a summary of your loan information and a summary of the amounts you've used your PP loan for and how much forgiveness you're requesting. One important thing that SBA has added to give a little bit more flexibility to PPP borrowers is they've added something called an alternative payroll covered period. So if you switch to slide 26, The PPP loan was set up for you to use those funds over the 8 weeks after you received the loan. And for a lot of businesses, that 8-week period doesn't line up well with your payroll cycle. So SBA has added this alternative payroll covered period to let you match your 8 weeks with your payroll cycle. So if you have a biweekly or more frequent payroll cycle and you want to start your 8-week period for your PPP loan on the first day of your payroll cycle, you can do that. You'll see on here, there's a little calendar. So if you receive your loan funds for your PPP loan on April 20th, then your normal 8-week period, your covered period, is going to start April 20th. And the last day of your covered period is going to be April 26th. Sorry, that last day of your covered period is going to be June 14th for that full 8 weeks. But you may have a payroll cycle that doesn't start until, April 26th. And so in that case, even though you receive your PPP loan funds on April 20th, you can wait until April 26th to start your 8-week period for purposes of payroll. The important thing to remember here is if you use any of your PPP loan funds for eligible non-payroll costs, you still have to use your standard covered period for that. So the first 56 days from the time you receive the loans, if you're using this for rent or utilities. But if you're using it for payroll, you at least have the option of lining this up with your pay cycle to make it a little bit easier. Slide 27 is really just the last portion of this summary page that you'll complete in the forgiveness application. A lot of the underlying information, you will complete schedules that are included in this application to fill out this summary page. So on this page, really just wanted you to see what this looks like. This page is where you will total and put the total amount of forgiveness that you're requesting, but most of the work will come from these underlying schedules that we'll go through next. So slide 28 is talking about what counts. So until about a week ago, the guidance said you had to use your PPP loans during your 8-week period. And it wasn't clear whether that meant you had to use them only for costs that were incurred during that 8 weeks, or whether it was only costs paid during that 8 weeks, or both. So the SBA guidance that came out a little over a week ago cleared that up and gives you a little more flexibility, which is a good thing. So if you pay bills or payroll during your 8-week period, or your alternative payroll covered period if you choose that, those amounts can be included and you can be eligible for forgiveness. Even if the cost was incurred prior to your 8-week period. So let's say your loan closed, you received your funds for your PPP loan on April 20th, and you're going to use for this your alternative payroll covered period because your payroll cycle starts April 26th. So if you pay payroll on April 26th, that payroll was incurred before April 20th. It was incurred before your loan funded, but that's okay. If you pay it during your period, then you can count that towards forgiveness. SBA is also allowing payroll costs to be forgivable if they were incurred during your covered period. So assume the same thing. You're using your alternative payroll covered period so that it aligns with your payroll, and your cycle ends on June 20th, and you would normally pay that on June 21st, which is right outside your 8-week period. That's okay too. You can still pay it on the scheduled pay date of June 21st, and because those payroll costs were incurred during your 8 weeks, you are allowed to include those. Let's flip to slide 29. Non-payroll costs, very similar. It's handled the same way. SBA is allowing those to be forgivable if you paid them during your 8-week period or if you incurred them during your 8-week period. So for instance, if your covered period is June 1st to June 26th, your May rent was incurred in May, but the payment is due and you pay it on June 1st. Since that June 1st date is in your covered period, that payment's eligible for forgiveness. It's also forgivable if it's incurred during your covered period, even if you pay it after day 56, but it's really important you have to make that payment on the scheduled due date at the latest. So if that payment, if your July rent, for example, the payment is due and paid on August 1st. August 1st is outside your covered period. But your covered period went through July 26th. So you incurred July 1st through July 26th rent during your covered period. So that portion, you'd have to prorate it, but that portion is eligible for forgiveness as long as you make that rent payment by its due date of August 1st. One thing that I do want to caution borrowers about, prepayments do not appear to be eligible. So if your covered period is June 1st to July 26th, you can't prepay August rent. That's not due yet, it's not incurred yet, and that appears to be something that SBA is not going to allow you to include. That it's possible the rules will change on that, but right now that's the guidance. So you should try and plan for use of your funds with those rules in mind. So the next page, page 30 of the slides, this is PPP Schedule A is one of the underlying worksheet schedules that you'll use to fill in that first summary page of the forgiveness application. Lines 1 through 5 of this will pull through the total payroll costs, the compensation portion. Lines 6 through 8 will show the total benefits, and line 9 is going to show your owner pay. That also gets counted as payroll costs and is also forgivable. So that you'll calculate on this Schedule A those amounts, and Schedule A is something also that you will turn in with the forgiveness application. The important things to remember from as you're completing Schedule A and as you're using your PPP funds, SBA in the guidance that it's released over the past week and a half has made more clear that if you need to pay hazard pay or incentives or bonuses to your employees right now to ensure your business continuity, and we're hearing that especially from businesses that are, their employees are dealing with the public, so grocery stores, restaurants as you're allowed to reopen. If you need to pay hazard pay and increase the amount that you would have paid your employees, that's okay, that's allowed. And that may help you meet some of the other requirements of making sure you're spending the right amount of this loan on payroll. But SBA is not allowing you to give yourself as owner that same benefit. So even if you are doing the same work that your employees are doing and that you consider hazardous and that you are paying your employees hazard pay for, if you are an owner of the business, you can't pay yourself hazard pay. You are very strictly limited to paying yourself 8 weeks worth of your 2019 average pay. that is new guidance that has come out over the past week, and so we want to make sure you're aware of that as you're planning for your use of funds as well. Important to remember that right now, the requirement is that at least 75% of your PPP loan has to go towards payroll costs, so compensation and benefits for your employees and owners. And you can spend all of your loan for payroll costs, and that's fine, but at least 75% has to go towards payroll costs. That's another part of the Paycheck Protection Program that we understand Congress is considering changing, but it's not clear whether a change will be made to that. And so as you're planning for use of funds and planning for forgiveness, you'll want to stick with that for now until you hear if the law has changed. The next slide, I think we're on 31, yes, is this same PPP Schedule A, but in this case, I want to think about businesses that don't have employees. So businesses, independent contractors or sole proprietors that don't have employees other than yourself. When you complete Schedule A, you're going to fill it out a little differently. So lines 1 through 8 on Schedule A for you will really just put not applicable. Lines 1 through 8 are asking for information about employees other than the owner. So this really won't apply to you. Line 9 is where you will enter your total payroll costs. A couple of important things to remember here. If you're an independent contractor or a sole proprietor with no employees other than yourself, same thing, SBA is limiting the amount that you can pay yourself to 8 weeks worth of your 2019 owner pay. And that's calculated the same way it was when you got your PPP loan. In your case, SBA is looking at your Schedule C and your net profit line on your Schedule C and considering that to be your annual pay, and then you're allowed to get 8 weeks worth of that. So if you if 8 weeks worth of your 2019 net profit on your Schedule C is less than $15,385, you would get that lesser amount, whatever it actually was. If you made more than $100,000 in net profit on your 2019 Schedule C, then you're going to be capped at $15,385. SBA won't allow you to make more than 8 weeks worth of $100,000. The other thing that's important, again, you can't increase whatever your 2019 pay was with hazard pay or cost of living increase, even if you, well, and for sole proprietors, you have no other employees, but that just won't be allowed. And SBA has added language in the past week that also won't let sole proprietors with no employees or independent contractors pay themselves retirement contributions with any of the funds or health insurance payments with any of the funds. Again, we're hopeful that some of this changes, but right now that is the language. That makes it really hard for an independent contractor or a sole proprietor with no employees to use the full amount of your PPP loan and be forgiven for the full amount of your PPP loan. So again, it's one of the issues that we are hopeful Congress is going to address, and it may improve. And so it's another reason why we think it is too early to apply for forgiveness. We think it's in your benefit to wait another week or two and see if Congress is able to act and allow a longer time period for you to use PPP funds. And that should solve this issue. A longer time period, you would be able to use your full loan amount as payroll if that provision passes. So more to come on that, we hope. But right now, these are the current rules. Flipping to slide 32, this PPP Schedule A worksheet is for employers, for businesses and nonprofits that have employees other than yourself. This is going to help you calculate the information that goes on Schedule A. But this worksheet is not a document that you need to turn into your lender when you request forgiveness. The good news for sole proprietors and with no employees and independent contractors is you can ignore Schedule A worksheet. You don't need to do this part, and that's one piece of really good news for you guys. For businesses and nonprofits that do have employees, though, you need to complete this. It requires you to list every employee, the amount of their compensation, their average full-time equivalent hours. This is what you will use to help compare whether you have maintained the same number of full-time equivalent employees that you had before COVID-19 struck, and whether you are still paying them at least close to the same salary that you were paying before. If full-time equivalent employees are reduced, or if their salaries are reduced by more than 25%, that would reduce the amount that is eligible for forgiveness. And so this worksheet is really important and is something that is going to help you answer the other questions. But again, this is your worksheet to help you answer those. This is not something that you turn in with your forgiveness application. Slide 33 is going to, is kind of the last half of that Schedule A worksheet. This has some language about the exceptions to full-time equivalent employee reductions. It's a little confusing. I think SBA didn't match up some of the options that they provided with the language on this worksheet, so we do think this is going to be updated. But be aware that there are some exceptions if you have reductions to your full-time equivalent employees, and we'll talk through some of those later in this presentation. But I want to flip now to slide 34. This is how you calculate your full-time equivalent employees. So your loan forgiveness amount will be reduced if you have less full-time equivalent employees at the end of your covered period than you had pre-COVID. One good thing that has become clear in the forgiveness application is since SBA had not told business owners and nonprofits how to calculate full-time equivalent at the time you applied for your loan, they're not holding you to whatever the number you used at application is. They've provided very clear instructions for how they want you to calculate it now, and you will calculate for your pre-COVID full-time equivalent and your post-COVID, your covered period full-time equivalent calculation to make that determination of whether you've reduced FTEs, full-time equivalent employees. It's based on a 40-hour work week. SBA has given a couple of options, one where you really will calculate, and the other where you will count any 40-hour employee as one full-time equivalent and anyone who works less than 40 hours as half of a full-time equivalent. We really recommend you calculate both ways so that you can maximize forgiveness. You're going to want to consider which way gives you the best chance of showing you've maintained the same number of full-time equivalent employees. You flip to slide 35. So the other information that has come out in the past week or so since the forgiveness application was released, SBA has provided 2 different periods that most businesses and nonprofits will use for determining their pre-COVID FTE numbers. Again, we recommend you calculate using both those periods and see which one results in the lowest number of pre-COVID full-time equivalent employees. that's the one you're going to want to use, because that gives you the best chance of showing you've maintained at least that same number during your covered period. I know I'm going through a lot of this really quickly, but I am hopeful we'll save more time for your questions. So let's flip to slide 36. I want to just highlight quickly for you the things that will reduce the forgivable amount of your PPP loan, so the things you really want to pay attention to while you're spending these PPP funds. You definitely want to make sure you're using the funds for eligible purposes. So the payroll costs, same way that was defined when you applied for your loan. That's the same kind of payroll costs that you can use it for now. Definitely want to make sure you're using it within the right 8-week period. 75% needs to go towards payroll costs. If you reduce the number of full-time equivalent employees, that will reduce your forgiveness amount. There are exceptions, and I think it's important to highlight these because these are really common for businesses and nonprofits, and these things will prevent you from having that reduction in your forgiveness amount. So you can refill positions. If employees leave or they've been laid off, you don't have to rehire that same employee. You can hire a new individual for that role, and that will maintain your same number of FTEs, so you'll be fine. You may have an employee that you had to lay off pre-COVID that refuses to come back. You may offer them their job back, and they may decide not to. If you document that, then again, that won't count against you. Your forgiveness wouldn't be reduced for that. You may have employees who voluntarily resign or who request reduced hours right now. And if you document that, that won't reduce your forgiveness amount. And unfortunately, this happens. You may have employees that you have to fire for cause. And if you document that, again, that will not reduce your forgiveness amount. So just keep really good documentation of these things, and hopefully you'll be able to not have a reduction in forgiveness. I want to go ahead and flip just to the last slide to cover these other things that are important to remember. One of the pages in the forgiveness application is required representations and certifications. Read those carefully. Make sure that you can honestly and accurately answer all of those. They're important. They're things that you want to make sure that you are paying attention to, and if there's something that you have a question about as you're completing it, reach out to your lender and ask them for guidance. Make sure you're interpreting it correctly. There is an optional demographic information page. We actually encourage you to complete this. Self-Help tries to collect this information on our borrowers up front because it helps us understand who we're serving, and it helps us understand areas where we may need to do additional outreach or work a little harder. And so I think for the same reasons, it's important for SBA to have this information. So we encourage you to complete that. Doesn't impact your forgiveness decision at all, but it could really help SBA address some lending inequities, and especially for underserved communities. It's important that you keep all of your documentation, and that includes even the Schedule A worksheet and documentation that you're not required to give your lender as part of the application. SBA is requiring you keep that for 6 years, and if SBA decides to review your loan, they will require you to provide them all of this information. So you need to keep it. I think it's very unlikely that many of these loans get reviewed at that level, but you need to protect yourself by having your documentation. Important that if you are using these funds for costs that are incurred but aren't paid until after your covered period, make sure you pay that bill on time. You're only allowed to include it if you pay it by the due date. So if you're even 1 day late, that will cause a problem with your forgiveness. Last thing I really want to highlight is if you aren't able to use all of your PPP proceeds for forgivable purposes, you will still apply for forgiveness for the portion that you could use for forgivable purposes. These loans ideally will be 100% forgiven, but if not, you should you'll still be able to get forgiveness for as much as possible. And you want to make sure you do that. Whatever amount is left over would then just turn into a loan that you paid over the remaining 2 years. I'm going to stop there because I know I've taken too much time already, and if there are questions, hopefully we can address those during the question and answer session.
All right, thank you very much, Tracy. As she mentioned, we are going to jump into Q&A right now. We're probably going to go a little bit past 11 just so that we can get a couple more questions answered. I do really quickly want to mention the slides are available for download on your resources tab on your panel as you're viewing, and a recording of this webinar will be posted on the IBIC Vimeo account within the next few days. So you will be able to access this presentation again, and you can download the slides right now. For question and answer, I'd like to welcome our panelists. We've got Tracy, who we just heard from, Ira Querepicon, and Dirk Albeck, who we also heard from during this presentation. And I'd like to welcome Xochitl Flores, the Bureau Chief for Economic Development in Cook County. Because we're a little pressed for time, I'm just going to jump right into some questions. Looks like our first question here is for Tracy. Is the PPP loan taxable income for the business? And are taxes withheld from paychecks to employees that are paid with PPP funds?
So the first part, if your loan is forgiven, normally forgiven debt, it becomes taxable income. The CARES Act specifically gave you a benefit on that. It's not going to be counted as taxable income. Right now, you also, if you pay expenses with the loan, you're not allowed to include those to reduce your taxable income. But the forgiven PPP amount, you aren't going to be taxed on. So that's good news on that. The employee tax question, I think I'm probably going to have to defer answering that. I think I'm not enough of a tax expert to answer that.
Okay, thank you very much, Tracy. Our next question is for Xochitl Flores. I did not qualify for PPP. What other resources are available to me from Cook County?
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Cook County is establishing a loan fund that is launching soon. Information about that loan fund can be accessed at cookcountyil.gov/recovery. And I'm encouraging everyone to start preparing their documents. There is a listing of documents and information that will be needed for our loan fund. This loan fund will be for independent contractors and small businesses that reside within suburban Cook County. So please go to our website and you will be getting up-to-the-minute information. We're constantly sending information to everyone that's registered on our website to notify them as soon as our loan gets launched.
Thank you, Xochitl. Our next question here is for Dirk. Dirk, can you run through how to calculate a significant decline in gross receipts?
I can, at a high level, I can do that. That would be how they define the significant decline in gross receipts is we're in calendar quarter. Your calendar quarter in 2020 is less than 50% of your gross receipts for the same quarter in 2019. So that'd really be the start of the calculation for doing that.
Thank you very much. A question for Tracy. I read somewhere that transportation funding is going to be included in PPP forgiveness. Is that true? And how can I include transportation in my forgiveness application?
So it's a good question. One of the items that SBA has listed as eligible under the utilities category is a service for transportation. They have not provided any guidance on what they mean by that. So we are still in the dark. We're hoping to get more information on what would be included, but it does appear that they intend for their in utilities, they include a service for transportation as something that would be forgivable. So hopefully over the coming days we'll have more information so you know exactly what you can include.
Thank you, Tracy. For Incurred, I have not applied for the Paycheck Protection Program yet. Who should I contact to find out if I'm eligible, and what should my first step in applying be?
So we at the Illinois Business Immigration Coalition have partnered with a few different lenders to provide technical assistance on the Paycheck Protection Program. So feel free to reach out to our organization. You can find us on Facebook as well as on our website. And I think the most important thing to put together before you sort of contact us, or as you also contact us, is putting together your payroll documentation, whether it's your 1099s if you're a sole proprietor or independent contractor, or your Form 941 to show that you've had payroll expenses. That's going to be the biggest first step in starting your payroll protection program application.
Thanks, Incurred. And let's have this be our last question for today, since we're already a little bit over time. Can I use the PPP money to pay employees if my business is allowed to reopen during the loan period?
Yes. So you can use PPP money to pay your employees during your 8-week period, whether you choose the covered period or the alternate period that lines up with your payroll. You can pay your employees even if they're unable to work right now, if your business is closed. If you are able to open and they can work, you can pay your employees. Either way, if you're paying employee salaries during your 8-week period, that is eligible for forgiveness.
Thank you, Tracy. And thank you to our panel. We're running out of time. We're a little bit over time, actually. So thank you to our panelists for sticking around. I know we did not answer everybody's questions. We had over 100 questions asked throughout the course of the presentation. So if you have any lingering concerns, please visit our website, all of our organization's websites, to get in contact with us. If you have additional or very specific questions, you can see those sites on your screen right now. As mentioned, the state of Illinois has released some helpful toolkits that you can find at the URL at the bottom of your screen. And as I mentioned, these slides are downloadable from your viewing portal on the Resources tab, and we'll be uploading a recording of this webinar on the ABIG Vimeo page. Next week, we'll be doing 2 webinars. One will be covering the same content in Spanish, and the other will be best practices for reopening as Illinois moves through the recovery phases. So please look out for invitations to those webinars and help us spread the word to other small businesses that will be in need of that information. Thank you all so much for attending, and please have a great rest of your week.